Are your marketing reports full of numbers but short on meaning? Do dashboards get updated weekly but no one really uses them? Today's guest says you don't need perfect data, you need insights you can act on. I'm joined today by Dana DiTomaso. She's here to help us cut through the noise. Yes, she'll share how to build reporting strategies that actually guide decisions and rethink what metrics really matter in 2025 and beyond. If your team is drowning in data but starving for clarity, this episode of Strategy Talks is for you. I'll be right back. See you in a minute.
Let's strategize together. Let's hear it from an expert. Join the conversation, it's informative and free. You and me, let's talk some strategy. Now here's your host, Morin-van.
Hello, everybody. It's me, Doreen. I'm here with an amazing guest, and I can't wait to have you meet her in just a minute. But before we do, I want to welcome all of you who are here live with us on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Welcome, everybody. If you happen to catch us on the replay, put hashtag replay in the comments if you have questions for myself or my guests. And then last but not least, for all of you who listen to Strategy Talks as a podcast, welcome to you as well. So I am ready to dive in. Let's see if Dana is as well. How are you today, Dana?
Good. How about you?
I am good. We're going to talk about data. So data and Dana. And
everyone's favorite topic. Oh, I know. Yeah, unfortunate naming there for sure.
Oh, that's so funny. I thought I was being clever. I am not. Sorry about that. So, Dana, let's dive in. You work with lots of teams, agencies, in-house marketers, probably lots of different people, all trying to do reporting better. What are the most common, and this is an easy layup, right? I'm hoping. What are the most common misconceptions that people have about reporting or how they're using it? What are some of the things that people do wrong?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is people don't necessarily think about the viewer of the report and what's interesting to them. So they'll say, oh, I guess I need to make a report. Okay, I'm going to put a table of sessions by channel. It's like, all right, stop right there. First off, tables are not interesting to people who aren't marketers. Most people do not want to see a table. Tables are boring. They don't do a great job of visually communicating information, right? And we're already starting off with a bad dashboard because we have this one table in there. It's like, look at all the traffic we got. Okay, but now what? And I think that that's where marketers have a really hard time putting themselves in the client or your boss or the board or whoever you report to, your stakeholders' shoes. And I think that that's where, typically when we start with a client, we ask them things like, what are the kinds of things that you've been asked in the past when it comes to data and reporting? Because that tells us the kinds of things that they ask. And they don't ask what are sessions by channel. They say which channels are doing the best job of bringing leads to our website. Okay, that is a completely different report, right? And so that helps us figure out what are the things we actually need to report on. And then I think the other thing too is this insecurity that marketers have where they say, oh, I don't know what they're going to find useful, so I'm just going to give them everything. Like nobody wants that report, right? If you can cut it down to 1 page, 2 pages of what is most important, if you could give one metric to the CEO that says, yes, we are moving in the right direction, what would that metric be? And I think that that's where, again, marketers have a really difficult time being able to do that. And I think it's something where coming at this from SEO, my background as an SEO before I moved into analytics, SEOs are really bad at it. PPC people are much better at it, which is why PPC people get budget and SEOs don't necessarily get budget. Okay. But I think taking that time to really understand, like, what questions am I actually answering here and build the report in advance before someone asks for it. Thinking about the reporting is one of the first things that we do at the very start of the project, because we also need to think about when we're making our analytics plans, when we're doing analytics implementations for a client, what do we want this final report to be? So let's make sure we're measuring the stuff that's going to be in that final report. So it's an integral part of that analytics planning strategy. And it's not necessarily an afterthought, which is kind of what ends up happening a lot of the time.
Wow, this is so good. And so you're saying that really marketers should be deciding what they're showing based on business goals and based on the
Hmm.
questions that they've been asked before. So if you're watching this and you're a marketer,
Yeah.
you get all that leeway. You don't need to show everything in the kitchen sink. You
Hmm.
need to know and show what the C-suite cares about. And if
Yep.
you needed to hear that, this is great. I know I needed to hear that. It's always good, Dana, to hear that again and again,
Hmm.
because you're right. I mean, we pull a monthly report on the last day of the month or the first of the month, and
Hmm.
we send that to a client. And I've worked with agencies where that's sent to the client before they have a meeting. Now, this is
Yeah.
kind of a side question, but when a report is pulled, and you made a good point, pulled a report before they ask for it, right? Have a
Yeah.
report ready. Do you call for a meeting to discuss the report, or do you send something to whoever needs to see it? What's your
It
preference?
really depends on the client. In most cases, we're making a Looker Studio dashboard and giving it to the client, and they can set whatever timeframes they want in the report. If there's something where it's like, well, you don't go past this date because we only major analytics not suck on date, then we'll have like a big, I call them post-it notes, like a big yellow box on the report being like, don't go past like October, 2023, because that's when we fixed up your analytics. Before that, your data is not accurate, just so they know. And then, because they're not going to look at the report all the time, they're not necessarily going to remember those specific dates. But usually we do try to be pretty self-serve with our data. With some clients, we do have a regular review, but I think it's less of a reporting presentation and more of a review of, let's talk about these results that we're seeing and let's see if we're going to rejig anything in our strategy as a result. And I think that you can set yourself up for this kind of power dynamic when you present a report where you're presenting it as if, I hope I'm doing okay. It's almost like you're back in school and you're hoping for that A, on your presentation. It's like, this is not what this is about. And it makes it less of a collaborative relationship. And it sets itself up where, especially agency people and freelancers, like one of the things that you always aim for is to be not a vendor. You want to be a consultant. And by doing this presentation, you're more of a vendor in the sense of like, well, here's your car's diagnostic. And that's not really what we're looking for here. We're looking for more of an equal partnership. And so I think for sure some companies are used to regular reporting presentations by agencies. And so when they work with us, they often have that question. We're like, we're going to give you a dashboard. And when it makes sense for us to meet with you to go through it, we'll totally do that. But you'll be able to look at this whenever you want. And I think sometimes for clients, it's a brand new thing to be like, oh, I can just like go look whenever I want. And you don't need to like, yeah, please do. I don't want to have to pull reports for you. Because I think there's this weird like gatekeeping that can happen in some agencies as well. And I think really you just want to have open reporting. And if things are going bad, like tell the client so they're not surprised. Like, not everything we do always works great, and that's okay. We're not perfect. But because you have this trust with this client, because you have this relationship built, it's okay if you make a misstep now and again, usually. I mean, some clients obviously aren't, they can never accept anything other than perfection, and those aren't necessarily great clients. I
No,
always
I
say
was
like,
gonna
don't require don't reward bad clients with good work, right? Like, it's if they're a bad
no,
client, let them go elsewhere. But
yeah.
I think that's an important dynamic in terms of how you set up your relationship, like approaching it with openness, answering the questions that they have, letting them look at the data whenever they want, and then if they have questions or whatever, that's also an opportunity for you to improve the report.
Yeah.
um yeah.
Yeah, I think giving them ownership of it, I think
Hmm.
that's really important. When we talk about reporting for, say, paid ads, I
Yeah.
still see agencies do this where they run the ads on their own accounts instead
Oh,
of
I
clients'
hate that.
accounts. And that is
Yeah.
such a bad way
And
to
they're
do
like,
that.
oh, it's copyrighted. It's Google ads. It's not like, there's no rocket science here. I always
Right.
tell people like, we're not sending a person to the moon. We're running advertising on the internet. Like, none of this is copyrighted. You're not doing anything special or different than anyone else out there. So, and also the same thing with data. Like, it's the client's data. The client should own it. I will die on this
100%.
hill 100 out of 100 times that its client owns it, because I've been doing this too long and I've seen so many like bad things that have happened early on in my career. This is like the early 2000s. There was one web developer, I was working in Hamilton, Ontario at the time, one web developer who would register the domains for clients and then not give them access to their domains. And then he was in a car accident. And then no one could get at his account. And so all the domains started to go up and we couldn't get access to them. And it's just like, don't be in that situation, you know?
And that actually reminds me of a lot of nonprofits who do that too.
Oh, they're the worst. Yep.
Right. They might have a sponsorship by an agency, or, it's like, they're bartering for, hey, you're going to highlight me and I'll do some pro bono work. And then the same thing, the nonprofit can't get into the website, or they don't know what's happening. They can't get changes made quick enough. And I've seen that too. So yeah, if you're listening to this, take ownership of it. And I've had several clients where what you were just describing, where, we have the dashboard and we have access. I go into the Google Analytics before we meet, and I'm like, hey, those last 2 blog posts that we co-wrote, they're doing really well. And based on that, let's do this next content. And that's the kind of client that you really want, right? Where you can make decisions based on the data that you have. That's really great. So let me check to see. The next question that I have is, reporting obviously should tell a narrative. And have you ever created a report where it changed how the team or the client acted, where you've, like, I see this and I believe you should do, make changes based on this? Do you have an example that you can share with us?
Yeah, I do actually, an example right now. So one of our clients is a moving company, and people can book online their moves. They can actually book the trucks and everything, not just get a quote, which is great. And what we were finding was that when we looked at the funnel, there was a big drop off between people getting the quote and then people actually booking. And so we dug into it a little bit more, and we actually don't think it's a drop off. What we think is happening is that people will get multiple quotes before they go ahead and decide where to book, but the session time's out. And so what they're doing is they're either getting another quote and then booking, or they're calling. And so what we're going to be doing, and we're working on this right now, is adding a quote ID to the quote. Be like, this is your quote. This is valid for X number of days. Email it to yourself right now, so then we get their email address. And then if you decide later to book with us, call and make sure to give the quote ID, and then our team can pull up the quotes. You don't need to fill up the form twice. And so that is our, I think, hypothesis right now, is that's what we think is happening based on what we're seeing for behavior. And I'm pretty sure it's going to bear out once we get this new form flow running, which will happen before the end of the year. I am really curious to see how it turns out, but I have strong feelings that it's going to be like, we know that they're getting the quote online, and then they're booking a week or 2 down the road is what we're sure is happening. So this will just help us close the loop on that. And I think this is where, for me, I'm not all hung up on they have to go back to the website and book. I don't really care how someone gets in touch with my client. I don't care if they call directly from a Google business listing. I don't care if they have your business card. I don't care if they walk into the store. I just want my client to have money. So however that happens, I'm not precious about it has to be through digital so I can track it. I don't care. And people use the internet in all sorts of weird, non-trackable ways. So just give up on that stuff and just, make sure that your client is making money. The end.
Right. But that was very, very good insight. I've had something similar with a very small client that was a law firm, where we had a lot of blog posts that got a lot of organic traffic, but we didn't have a clear call to action at the bottom and didn't have a button. So I went back in, and every single blog post had after reading this, if you're ready to talk to a lawyer, make an appointment. And that really helped, because there was no clear, they're like, this is such great information. And they would read another blog, and they would read another blog, but there was never that, here's the button that you need to push. So we fixed it. And that made all the difference. So
it's so funny too, because it's can't people figure this out? No, they can't.
Nope.
No, they can't. Nope. I have never seen a negative impact from adding more conversion calls to action on a page.
Right.
Just toss a couple extra buttons on there. It's fine. It works. It's not.
Right. And the best part is you can see the data on which button they push, if it's in the middle or at the bottom. Right. So I think that this is your example was such a good example of what can happen when you really follow the data and then take action on that. I think that is a great example. So is there such a thing as good enough data or bad data, or, is there stuff that people focus on, or if, you're like, hey, it tells me this, but I know that wasn't right. Are
Yeah.
tools ever wrong? Is our data ever
Oh,
wrong?
all the time. Yeah. No, our
Okay,
data is
so
never
let's talk about
correct.
that.
No, it's always fairy tales. I mean, I think there's some more accurate data than others, but certainly, it does depend on the setup, of course. And just remember that again, like the systems that we use for measurement are fragile and they're subject to the whims of people using the internet, which people do all sorts of weird stuff. Like I'm a Gen X and I'm like, oh, buying online, that's a laptop activity. I can't possibly buy on my phone. So I might Google something and then like send myself the link. And then I'm going to open up the link from an email I sent myself. And then I've completely ruined that attribution
Oh my
chain.
gosh, I do the
Right?
same thing. I'm
Yeah.
X too, so
That's a
yes,
laptop
yes,
activity. Yeah,
yes,
absolutely. I mean, I
yes.
don't think the youth of today are like that. They're probably like, God, that person's so old. But I think it's also, I think that that's how people use the internet, right? And that's really common. And every once in a while, though, if I see a really good ad, I do try to convert in that same session in the same browser just to be like, I hope you, get your set of wings today because it was a really good ad. I want to make sure to convert. But yeah, I think that that's where just realizing where the issues are and things like, for example, if you're using client-side tracking, which is your typical GA4 placed on a website, people have ad blockers and they're going to block GA4 from running. If you are dealing with anyone in, say, the European Union or California, and you have to have a consent management on your website, if people say no to being tracked, you can't track them. And when the new consent requirements came out, it was so funny. There's all these posts in the various Slack channels that I'm a part of that was like, yeah, we put consent on our website and now we're only seeing like 70% of the sessions we saw before. I'm like, that's it working. Like, oh, but where'd the 30% no? I'm like, well, they said no to being tracked and so you can't track them. And they're like, well, how can I track them? I'm like, well, you could set up your consent incorrectly. And then you just track them anyway, which is what I see. I see a lot of consent setups that are set up wrong and they're tracking everyone, but they shouldn't be. Yeah, it's just if someone says no to being tracked, you can't track them, period. And I think that is, I don't know why that is such a hard concept for especially leadership to get their mind around. They're like, well, I still want to track them, but they said, no, you can't. But I still want to. Okay, but they said, no, you can't. And it's just a circle of like, look, you cannot track these people. So you work with what you can, you let go of what you can't. There are some things, for example, like server-side tracking, get around ad blockers. But if you're a small business, like don't bother with that. Just work with what you've got. I know there's some clients we have in the EU where 70% of people say no to tracking. So we work with 30% of their data. Are we happy with that? No. Is that the current legislative reality? Yeah, because GDPR fines are like not kidding around amounts of money. Don't mess with them. And that's just so we just do what we can with what we've got instead of trying to obsess over stuff that we can't capture.
Right. And for those of you listening, when you have only 30% of the data, you need to start doing social media listening and you need to look for sentiment and you need to do not just data analysis, but you need to do language analysis and go see what people are saying. And you can learn a lot of stuff from that too. So that's a whole different session, but there are ways that you can find out what your customers want and look for all of that. So, hey, I thought I had my do not disturb on, but I just rang. So here we go. I'll just turn it off. That just totally messed up my thought process there. Okay. So when we're building reporting layers, right? How do you think about which metrics live at which level? And that's kind of, I don't know if that's more an advanced question or, like where should we go and how do you set that up? How do you explain that to us?
So typically what we'll do is we'll take those questions. So going back to that first like survey that we'll ask the client or what are the questions that you're asked. And so then I'll take that question. And one of them might be, I'm just thinking about one I just did yesterday. And the first question was, where do our best leads come from? So I think, okay, so and it's almost like I'm doing like analysis on the sentence, like in English class when you broke down bits of the sentence into different words. So I want to know where my best leads. Okay, so we've got best and we've got leads. So first off, we can track where your leads come from, but you want to know where your best leads come from. So that tells us that we're going to need some sort of integration between not just where the lead came from, but also being able to track if it was a good lead or not. So now we're talking about getting information into your CRM. So for example, this particular client uses Salesforce. Great. Well, you can take the leads, push it into Salesforce with a connection that shows, this was their Google Analytics session that originally brought them to the website. Now they're in Salesforce. And then when they move through the Salesforce process, we can then push events back into GA4 with different parts of the process. So they're now a marketing qualified lead. They're now a sales qualified lead. They're now in like working this lead. This lead has now closed. And all those different stages can get pushed back to GA4. So it's not just where did leads come from, but where our best leads come from. And then we can take a look and present that as kind of like a funnel and say, all right, so proportionally, this channel brings in your highest proportion of good leads compared to the volume of traffic that it brings in. And typically when I'm presenting that kind of data too, I'm looking at the data more directionally. So I'm not saying you had 4,000 visits and 18 leads or whatever it is. Instead, it's this channel represents 32% of your overall sessions, and it represents 38% of your closed leads. So this channel is punching above its weight. And we're not looking at numbers at that point. We're just looking at proportions. And so I have a blog post on my website called Marketing Analytics is Wrong. What can we do about it? Basically, spoiler alert, is just like use directional reporting.
Yeah.
And I have some examples of reports I've built in Looker Studio where I do this kind of directional percentage-based reporting, which really helps the client as well sort of get over the numbers. And instead, we're just looking at like, do the pretty bars line up? That's it. That's all I want to know. And that means you have a much more productive conversation, because the other half of it too is knowing that analytics is not correct. They might say, oh, but I had 38 leads and I only see 32 leads here. It's like, okay, well, those people had an ad blocker. So that way we're not having that discussion entirely. Like if the people have an ad blocker, they can't hide from filling out the form, but they're not going to be in GA4 regardless. So I know they're not going to come up in this proportional report anyway. So I'm just looking at the people that I could track, and I'm letting go of the people that I couldn't. And so again, like one of the questions we ask ourselves is this channel punching above or below its weight?
All right. How would you, and this is a side question just because I've been really digging deep into the data for my podcast, for example. My podcast lives on Captivate. I go live to LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook. So I have different analytics there, and then I can see downloads. But there's so much data that I'm looking at. And then one of the things that just popped up, and this is crazy, but I kind of want to bring this in, somebody on LinkedIn posted recently a bunch of examples of podcast thumbnails. And the visual that they had just made me go, wait a second, I think my thumbnail's all wrong. So I started looking at it, and I updated my thumbnail to just say strategy talks. It had a bunch of other stuff on it. And the day that I updated it in Captivate, it went to, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, everywhere, because it got updated. And I swear it has to be that AI is now reading the name Strategy Talks. The volume of people downloading my podcast in that time is like tenfold of what
amazing.
it was before.
Yeah.
And it's just like a switch, but I'm like, so I can't really say it attributes to that, but I'm doing reverse engineering, and I think that's what it is. Are you dealing with, stuff that you're seeing? It could be just a thing as a thumbnail or a change. Can you qualify that, or can you find that? Do you do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a metric also in that same post, which we'll include in the show notes, about market analytics being wrong. And one of the things that I do calculate is called effectiveness. So we look at one top level metric. And so, for example, for you, it could be, for example, number of impressions, for example, number of subscribers. And then we would compare it to your bottom level metric, which would be, say, number of downloads. So if I'm thinking about like my own YouTube channel, for example, my top level metric is number of impressions across everywhere. And then my bottom level metric is number of subscribers. And I'm not looking at the attribution of where they came from. I'm just looking at that percentage of those two numbers. If that percentage is flat or has gone up, then something I'm doing is more effective. If it's gone down, then something I'm doing is less effective. And so this could be really any two numbers. For example, it could be like the percentage, the impressions of people seeing your billboards and listening to your radio ads and, whatever you get from your media blocking charts, divided by the number of transactions you have in store. Don't worry about attribution. You're just looking at that top level, which is the number of people who are aware of me at some point, versus your bottom level, which is the thing that's going to make me money, And so, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be transactions. It could be, for example, numbers of hours booked if you're a consultant, for example. It really depends on what that most important metric is to you. And then just divide those two, and then that's one single metric that you can just keep an eye on over time and see how it's doing. And so I do go over that effectiveness metric on that post as well.
Yeah. All right. That's awesome. Because I really feel like I unlocked something, and I was like, oh, be a lot more I need to unlock, but I've really been diving in, and I'm loving it. And I was so excited to talk to you today about this. So,
I also love, I want to say too, like, I also love sometimes how marketing is just like, oh, I changed this one thing. And it's why, like, billing, if you still bill hourly as a freelancer, like, you might want to get away from that, because how would you bill for that, right? That's your expertise.
Yeah,
it's not the 15 minutes you spent making a new thumbnail. It's seeing that thing, realizing, oh, I should try that, and then actually doing that thing. That's the value there, not for your time. So we don't track hours, for example, at our agency anymore, bill based on hours at our agency anymore, because the value is not there. So anyway, just a little
I love that. I work with agencies, and most agencies, I give them a retention rate. You know, I'm going to work with this client, and you're asking me to help with strategy, or you're asking me with content management. This is what I want. And they always come back and go, so what's that per hour? I'm like, I don't know. You figure it out. This is the project you asked me to do. This is what I want to do. And it's not based on hourly, because you get all of me. I have 15 years of experience. So I love that you do that. That is really fantastic. So, all right. So how do you get a feedback loop between reporting and experimentation? I know we're almost already out of time, but let's talk about that. So that feedback loop, like, you know, I was describing, I would actually go into a meeting with a client. We would look at the data together. Is that the kind of feedback loop that you have, or is there another way to do it?
Yep. So we would be like, on this date, we tried this thing, and this is what we're seeing, for example, and really trying to make sure, like, tracking everything that happened too, because often, especially if you're working with larger organizations, it's not just one thing that's happening at a time. It's like 18 different things. So sometimes it's harder to pin, like, oh, this thing moved the needle. But if you know that everything else is kind of static from the other stuff that's going on, and then this one thing changed, then you would know. And I think back to like a campaign we're working on with a home builder, and they suddenly saw a ton more direct traffic on their website. And the direct traffic was from people typing in the URL directly from this really fantastic set of Subway ads that they were running. You know, and it's just like, obviously none of it's attributable. I don't care. It's clearly from this thing, because it started on this date, and then the pickup was right there. And then when it ended, it went back down again. So yes, we should run that again, or run something else like that again, you know? And it's like, I don't care about the attribution, which, you know, other people probably get hung up about. But like, I don't care. You had more people come to you. You sold more homes.
Right.
Plus, you know,
that makes sense. Yeah. Before we go, if somebody is watching this, listening to this, and they're like, my dashboard's all wrong, or my, you know, like, if they wanted to do like an audit, or to take a step back look at what it is there like a tip or an idea, or maybe you have a resource that you can say, go work on this, or do this? Because I think a lot of us have been taught or expected to give all of the data. And we started out this conversation with, we give too much data, the reports are too big, you know, table things don't work. Like, so if somebody's like, I've listened to Dana, I want to be like Dana, what can somebody do to take that first step into doing a better job reporting and having a better conversation with a client, and getting their ads to work better, or the content to work better?
So I think the biggest thing is, don't start by the technical dashboard that you're loading up. Like, so for those of you listening, you don't know, I'm holding up a notebook right now. And so I use a notebook called Field Notes. It's a really fun little notebook out of a company in the States. And one of the things is, I'll write my dashboard on half of this page, and I'll just sketch out exactly what I want it to look like. And that's all the room I've got. And if I can't make it legible, that small size, then I've tried to cram too much on there. And then we move on to the next one, and then we move on to the next one. What I want to avoid is like these Star Trek style dashboards where there's like 18 things, and it's perfect for my screen. And so, for example, like, my travel laptop is a little Chromebook that doesn't have a great screen resolution. And if I can't see the report on that, well, I guess the client's not going to have a great time either. So really trying to remember, again, like, you have all the latest technology. I have 2 screens right now. I have them attached to this fancy gaming computer that I also use to play games outside of work hours. And like, this is not my client setup. My client setup is like some, you know, ThinkPad that they've had since 2017. I need to make sure my dashboard's going to run on that. And so really trying to dial it back as much as possible, and just giving people a narrative. Don't overwhelm them with data. data is not their job. Data is your job. So your job is to communicate it in a way that isn't going to make them feel like you're talking down to them, or you're making it too complex, or you're just trying to like show off how smart you are. If you've done something super cool and you're like, I want someone to pat me on the head about how cool this is, the client is not the person to do that. Message me on LinkedIn and I will happily tell you how cool your stuff is. So anytime you let me know. I love hearing about cool stuff people are doing. So just tell me.
I love it. Oh, this was such an insightful conversation. Dana, I am so excited you were here today. So if people have listened to this and they're like, I need to follow, and I want to mention, it's in the show notes, but you've done LinkedIn learning courses. You teach a lot of this stuff. How can people connect with you? How can they find you? And what's the best way if they have questions to follow up with you?
Yeah, for sure. So I have, in addition to LinkedIn learning courses, I have my own courses at analyticsplaybook.com. And I also do training, consulting, just, tell me if I'm doing something wrong, ad hoc hours that you can buy of my time if you just want to chat on a Zoom call about a problem you're having. The best place to find me is on LinkedIn. There's only one Dana DiTomaso, so type in any old variant of my last name you think it is, and Google will usually figure it out.
Okay, awesome.
And then you'll end up on my LinkedIn. But yeah, that's where I'm most active for sure.
Perfect. Well, I'll put all of the links into your website and maybe even to your LinkedIn learning courses in the show notes. So all of you who are listening and watching and made it all the way to the end can find and connect with Dana. Dana, thank you so much for being with me today. I learned a lot and I'm very excited to dig deeper into data. So I'll be back next week with another episode of Strategy Talks. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.